The throne room of Ashmere has survived a siege, a coronation, and the funeral of every king for 300 years. It has never survived a night like this one. The great doors hang open. A tapestry that took 40 women 4 winters to weave lies torn from its rings, crumpled underfoot like a shed skin. Chairs are overturned. The long oak council table, the one Emeric Vale once split down the center with a single blow to make a point to men who doubted him, has been dragged from its place and shoved aside, and the king is on his knees behind it, carrying through a mountain of ledgers. He is the most dangerous creature any of them has ever stood near. They all know the stories. They watched him come back from the Ashfall War, with Warlord Grail's banner wrapped around his fist and frost in his eyes. A man who had ended a war that older, colder kings had called unwinnable. Wolves who challenged him did not challenge him twice. Enemies who heard he was coming laid down their blades before he arrived. Mothers in the border villages still quiet their children with his name. He is 7 feet of certainty and controlled violence, and he has never once in living memory looked lost. He has broken siege lines with his bare hands. He has stood alone in a burning pass and held it. He is a thing shaped entirely for war and for winning, and every soul in this room has spent years being grateful. He was theirs and not someone else's. He looks lost now. It was here, he says. His voice is wrong, cracked at the edges, scraped hollow. Her name was written here, in this book, on this line. He drives one finger against the open page, hard enough that the paper tears. Someone has cut it out. No one moves. Bastien stands 3 steps away, with his hands open and empty. The way you stand near a wounded animal you love and cannot help. Around the walls, the guards have gone to stone. A young clerk clutches a stack of records to his chest like a shield. The silence in the room is enormous, a held breath that has forgotten how to let go. Because the page is not cut, the page is whole. There is simply nothing on the line where the king's finger lands a clean, pale gap between 2 other names, as if the ink there had decided all on its own to stop existing. Emeric, Bastien says quietly. It is the only mercy he has left. First names, in private, when the king cannot bear his title. Emeric, tell me what she looked like. Tell me anything. We'll find her. The king lifts his head, and for a moment, the whole terrible thing is written across his face. The effort of a man reaching into his own mind and closing his hand on fog. She has ink on her fingers, he says slowly. Here, the first 2. He touches his own fingertips, wondering. There is a tooth in front, the left one, that sits a little crooked, and she hates it. And she covers her mouth when she laughs. And I have told her. He stops. His jaw works. She smells of tallow and crushed thyme. And when she laughs and forgets to hide it, it is like a small bell struck once, clean, in a cold room. He says all of this the way a drowning man describes the shore. Her name, he says, give me her name. And Bashan, who has served this king since they were boys, who followed him into the ashfall and dragged him out of it. Who would give his own name away gladly if it would help, opens his mouth to answer. Nothing comes. He reaches for it and finds the same clean, pale gap the king found in the ledger. He knows there was a woman. He can feel the shape of her, at the edge of every recent memory. The way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. A quiet person in the corridors, a candle always lit. Someone who made the king sleep when everyone had sworn that was no longer possible. Bastien knows she was real the way he knows he has a heart, by its absence when it stops. But the name is gone. And he understands, with a lurch of pure horror, that it is gone from him too. That whatever is unwriting her from the ledgers is unwriting her from all of them, one mind at a time, and that the king, whose curse this is, whose sleep this began in, is simply losing her fastest. Send for the records of the night staff, the king says, rising. The wardens. Whoever tended these chambers this past season, there will be a wage tally, a requisition, a summons order with a name on it. They bring everything. They bring it fast, because they are afraid. There is no wage tally for a night warden. There is no requisition. There is a room on the royal floor, with a narrow bed pushed close to the king's own, and a chair worn smooth by long sitting. And there is no order anywhere in the palace of Ashmere that explains who sat there. A corridor on that floor ends now, in a blank wall of stone, where 3 of them will swear a door used to be. A portrait in the West Gallery has gone smooth and featureless in its frame, a face rubbed to nothing, and no one can say whose face it was. The longer they look, the worse it becomes. A cup on the king's nightstand, set out for 2. A second cloak hook by his door, with nothing on it, and no reason to be there. A name half the household is certain. They knew this morning, and cannot find in their mouths tonight, the way you cannot find a word you have said 10,000 times. Wherever she stood, the world is going soft and pale, closing over the space she filled like water closing over a dropped stone. And it is spreading outward, from the king himself, from the place in him where she lived, as if he is the wound and she is the blood, and he is bleeding her out of the world, 1 hour at a time. It is as if the palace has employed a ghost. As if someone reached into the world and gently, deliberately, pulled a single thread, and the world is quietly unraveling toward the place where she used to be. The king stands very still in the wreckage of the only room that ever frightened his enemies. When he speaks again, it is almost too soft to hear. "Find her," he says. "Find the girl whose name I can no longer hold." His hand closes slowly into a fist. "Find her? Before I forget I was ever looking. What none of them know, what he does not know, not yet, not anymore, is that she was not taken. She chose this. She walked into the dark on purpose, and pulled the thread herself, because it was the only way to save him. And the last thing she asked of the world was that he be allowed to forget she had ever existed." The world was happy to oblige. 3 months earlier, Lynette had been invisible for so long that she had started to think of it as a skill. It was, in its way. There was a craft to being unseen inside a great house, to trimming a lamp without the person beneath it glancing up, to slipping along the servants' passages behind the walls, so that the lords and ladies of Ashmere never had to be reminded that their bread was baked, and their fires were laid and their chamber pots were carried away by human hands. Lynette had trimmed the lamps and laid the fires and carried the pots since she was 9 years old, and by 20 she had refined invisibility into something close to art. It helped that she had never really had a name to be called by. She had been left on the steps of the almshouse, in the coldest week of a hard winter, wrapped in a linen flour sack, and the woman who took her in had looked at the little bird of a thing squalling in the cloth, and written Lynette in the ledger for lack of anything better. A small brown bird, common, the kind no one looks at twice. It had turned out to be the truest name anyone could have given her, and she had never once heard it spoken with warmth. She did not mind. That was the thing she told herself, and she had told herself so many times that it had almost worn a groove she could believe in. She did not mind being no one. No one was safe. No one was never disappointed, because no one was never hoped for. When you are no one can leave you, because no one ever arrives. She had decided this at 11, watching a pair of well-fed almshouse patrons choose a golden-haired child 2 beds down, and she had built her whole self around it since, brick by careful brick, until the wall was so high and so smooth that she had almost stopped noticing there was a girl behind it at all. The other servants did not dislike her. That would have required noticing her. They passed her in the passages the way you pass a chair. When they spoke of her at all, which was seldom, they called her the quiet one, and she had learned to take it as the closest thing to affection she was likely to be given. She had 2 secrets, and both were useless. The first was that she could read and write. She had taught herself as a child from a water-warped primer left behind in the almshouse stillroom, a skill of no possible use to a girl who trimmed lamps. She fed it in private anyway. keeping her own small tally book of the oil she drew, and the candles she cut, a record no one had asked for and no one would ever read, simply because writing things down made her feel, for a moment, like a person worth recording. It left the first two fingers of her right hand forever stained with ink, and no one ever noticed that either. Her second secret lived in her apron pocket, a sprig of dried thyme replaced whenever it crumbled, because the woman who had named her used to tuck thyme among the linens, and it was the smell of the one place that had ever, however briefly, felt almost safe. She worked the night shift on the lower floors, which was the shift for people no one wanted to look at in daylight, and she was good at it. And that would have been the entire shape of her life, if old Perpetua had not slipped on the scullery stones the second week of autumn. Because Perpetua had worked the royal floor, there was an open secret in the palace of Ashmere, the kind everyone knew and no one said, the way a family knows which door not to open. The king did not sleep. Not properly, not since the war. The servants who tended the royal floor at night did not last. They came down after a week or a month with a gray cast to their faces and a flinch behind their eyes, and they asked to be moved, and they were moved, and no one asked them what they had seen because no one wanted to be told. A few of them did not ask to be moved. A few of them simply were not there one morning, and their names were not spoken again, and the ledger did not seem to remember them either. So, when the housekeeper came down to the lower floors with a lamp and a list, and a mouth set in a hard line and stopped in front of Leonard understood before the woman opened her mouth. "You," the housekeeper said. Not Leonard. She likely did not know it. "You'll take the royal floor, night duty, starting tonight." "Me," Leonard said. "You've no family to make a fuss," the housekeeper said, and it was not unkind exactly. It was simply true, and they both knew it, and that was precisely why the choice had fallen where it fell. A servant who would be missed was a servant worth protecting. Leonard would not be missed. Leonard was the safe one to spend. Keep the fires, keep the candles lit. Do not speak to him unless he speaks first, and he will not speak first. And whatever you see, the housekeeper hesitated, and something moved behind her face that Leonard would think about later. Whatever you see, you keep it behind your teeth. Do you understand me? Yes, Leonard said. She did not understand. She only thought she did. That first night, she climbed the stair to the royal floor, with her heart going like a trapped moth, and she let herself into the antechamber of the king's rooms, and she knelt at the cold hearth and began, with quiet practiced hands, to build a fire in the private chambers of the most dangerous man in the world. She did not see him at first. The great bedroom beyond was dark, the curtains drawn, and she assumed, foolishly, that he was elsewhere, in a council or a hall or wherever it was that kings spent the dead middle of the night. She fed the fire until it caught. She trimmed the candles. She was reaching to draw the heavy drapes a little straighter when she heard it, a sound from the dark of the bed, low and rough and utterly without dignity. The sound of a strong man losing a fight to something he could not see. Leonard froze with her hand on the curtain, and in the corridor below, on the stroke of the hour, a bell began to toll midnight, and something in the dark room drew a long, ragged, waking breath, and said in a voice full of grief and gravel, "Who's there?" She should have run. Everything she had trained into herself for 20 years, the invisibility, the behind-the-walls silence, the art of never being the thing anyone looked at, every instinct told her to set down the poker and slip out the servant's door, and never climb that stair again. Instead, she said, into the dark, "Only me, your majesty. The fire had gone out. I've built it up again." There was a silence. Then the bed curtains moved, and King Emeric Vale sat up out of the shadows, and Linnet learned in a single breath why the servants came down gray. He was enormous. Yes, she had known that. Everyone knew that. But it was not his size. It was his face. In the firelight it was carved down to the bone with a tiredness so deep it had stopped looking like tiredness and started looking like a wound. His eyes found her, and they were the flat, glittering, hunted eyes of a man who has not been allowed to rest in so long that he has forgotten rest is a thing that happens to people. He looked at her the way a drowning man looks at a piece of driftwood. He does not quite believe is real. "You're new," he said. "Yes, Your Majesty. They send new ones," he said, "when the old ones break." He said it without cruelty. He said it like weather. "You'll break too. Build the fire and go." She should have gone. She built the fire higher instead, because his hands were shaking and the room was cold, and because she could not have said why. The sheer, grinding loneliness coming off the man made something in her chest pull toward him against every ounce of sense she had. She hummed while she worked. It was a habit from the almshouse, a tuneless under-the-breath thing she did when she was frightened, and she did not notice she was doing it until she realized the ragged edge had gone out of his breathing. He had gone quiet. When she risked a glance, his eyes had closed. The terrible tension had eased out of his shoulders. He was not asleep. She did not think a man like that ever truly slept, but he was still, and still seemed to be more than he had managed in a long time. She stayed. She told herself it was to keep the fire. She sat in the chair by the cold window, and she kept the candles lit, and once, when his breathing turned rough again, and his hands began to fist in the sheets, she crossed the room without deciding to, and rested 2 fingers against the back of his hand, and said, "You're all right. You're in your own rooms." The fire's lit, and the fit passed, and she went back to her chair, and she did not sleep, and neither entirely did he. But the night passed, and the gray light came, and she slipped out before the palace woke. She thought that was the end of it. It was Bastien who found her the next dusk, at the foot of the servants' stair, and the look on the second's face stopped her cold. He was a tall, watchful man with a soldier's stillness, and right now that stillness had a crack running through it. "You were on the royal floor last night," he said. It was not a question. "I built the fire," Lynette said, her stomach dropping toward her shoes. "That's all." "If I did something wrong." "This morning," Bastien said, low and careful. The king woke, and before he had washed or dressed or spoken to a single soul, he said, "Ask the Night One whether the one-eyed cat ever won back the buttery." He watched her face. "You told him a story last night." "A small one. Nothing." I hummed. "I might have said something to settle him. I don't." She stopped. "Yes, I told him a foolish story. To fill the quiet." "He remembered it," Bastien said. "People remember stories. He does not." Bastien stepped closer and dropped his voice until it was barely a shape in the air between them. "Listen to me, and do not repeat it, and do not let it show on your face where others can see. The king has not held a memory past midnight in a year. Do you understand what I am telling you? Every morning I walk into his rooms and I introduce myself. Every morning he relearns the war is won, that his enemies are dead, that he is king. He meets his own council new each day and hides it, and I help him hide it, and it is killing him a little more every night, because whatever eats his sleep eats his memory with it." His jaw tightened. In a year, no one and nothing has crossed midnight in his mind. And this morning he woke, remembering a story a servant told him in the dark. The corridor felt suddenly very cold. Lynette became aware of her own heartbeat. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "I know," Bastien said. "That's what frightens me." He straightened, and the mask of the king's second came back down over his face, but his eyes stayed on her, and in them was something she had never once seen aimed at her in her whole invisible life. He was looking at her like she mattered. It should have felt good. It didn't. Being looked at was a thing that happened to other people. People with names that got called, and faces that got remembered. And the weight of Bastien's attention settled over her like a coat 2 sizes too large, unfamiliar, and somehow heavier than being ignored had ever been. Some old instinct in her strain to step back into the comfortable dark of being no one, where nothing was expected and nothing could be lost. She found uneasily that she could not. "You'll come back tonight," he said, "and every night after. And you will tell no one what happens in those rooms." He turned to go, then paused. "There is someone you should speak to first. Someone who keeps the old records, the ones that remember what the war really cost." A shadow crossed him. "Her name is Verity. If anyone in Ashmere knows what has its teeth in him, it's her. And if she agrees to tell you." He hesitated, and for the first time the unshakable second of the Alpha King looked almost afraid. "Then may the gods help you, girl, because once you know, you won't be able to walk away. And I don't think he survives you walking away." The archive of Ashmere lived at the bottom of the oldest tower, down a stair that spiraled so far into the rock that the air changed on the way, going cold and dry, and smelling of dust and time. Lynette had never been down it. Servants had no business in the place where the kingdom kept its memory. She found that thought unbearably funny now, and then found she could not laugh. Verity was waiting for her at a long table lit by a single shielded lamp, and she was older than anyone Lynette had ever seen, old the way the stone was old, worn smooth and hard. Her eyes, when they lifted from the ledger before her, were the clearest thing in the room. "So," the lore-keeper said, "you're the candle they carried up the stair." She studied Lynette the way a physician studies a wound. "Sit. Bastien sent you, which means Bastien is frightened, which means you had better hear all of it, because the half of it will get you killed faster than the whole." Lynette sat. "What do you know of the Ashfall War?" Verity asked. "That the king won it." "The king ended it," Verity corrected, "which is a different and heavier thing. Warlord Grail meant to burn the northern granaries with 10,000 souls still penned inside the walls, and Emeric Vale marched into the ash and stopped him, held the line at a cost no one will ever fully know, and saved every one of them, and came home a hero, and has not had one whole night's peace since." She folded her spotted hands. "Winning a war costs a man his soldiers. Ending one costs him something he cannot name and cannot bury, though the gods know he has tried to bury it. That is the part that matters. He tried to bury it," the lamp hissed. "There is an old thing in the world," Verity went on, "older than Ashmere, older than the Wolfline. The keepers of my order call it the Grey. It is not a demon and not a god. It is more like a tide, and it comes for people who are carrying a grief so heavy they would give anything to set it down. It hears that wish, and it answers it. It offers them the one mercy no healer can. It offers to make them forget." Her voice dropped. "The king, in the worst of his grieving, wished a single memory gone. He does not remember wishing it. Sections. That is the cruelty of the bargain. The Grey takes the wish, and takes the wish's memory with it, so the drowning man never even knows he agreed to drown, and then it pulls one thread a night. It promised to take his pain, and instead it is taking him. Every face, every name, every yesterday, a little more each time he closes his eyes." Lynette's mouth had gone dry. "That's why he can't hold a memory past midnight. That is why. And because he is the Alpha King, because the land and the pack are bound to him, root and marrow, what the Grey unwrites in him, it unwrites in Ashmere. A river was forgotten last spring. There is a dry bed now where children used to swim, and the maps show nothing. And no one weeps for it because no one recalls it was ever wet. A whole family's name is gone from the rolls. The kingdom is being quietly emptied out through the hole in its king, and almost no one has noticed, because the Grey eats the noticing too. Everything's been tried," Lynette said. It was not a question. She had seen the gray-faced servants come down the stair. "Everything." Verity's mouth thinned. "Drats that would fell a bull, a witch from the fens. 3 physicians from the southern courts, one of whom I would not trust to shoe a horse. Prayer, chains. Once, gods forgive us, when he asked to be chained so he could not walk into the Grey and be lost in it. Nothing holds. He shuts his eyes and the tide takes him." She leaned forward, and the lamp threw her shadow huge against the shelves of the dead. And then a nameless girl trims a lamp and hums a foolish tune, and in the morning he remembers a cat. Do you understand why that is the most dangerous thing to happen in this palace in a year? No, Lynette whispered. Neither do I, not fully. But I have a guess. Verity's clear eyes pinned her. The gray feeds through what a person holds, their grief, their love, their fierce grip on the people they cannot bear to lose. That grip is the handle it takes hold of. And you, she tilted her head, you hold nothing. Child, you have made yourself into a girl with no grip at all, no one to lose, and no one to lose you. And so, when you sit beside him in the dark, the tide reaches for a handle and finds none. It slides right off you. For a few hours a night, you are a place the gray cannot go. You are, God's help us, a shelter. Lynette sat very still with that. It was the first time in her life anyone had told her that the wall she'd built, the terrible, careful, nothing she'd made of herself, was good for something. She should have felt proud. Instead, something cold was climbing her spine. Because Verity's face had not softened, it had done the opposite. You said I was the candle they carried up the stair, Lynette said slowly. Not the first candle. A candle. For a long moment Verity did not answer. The last girl who anchored him, Lynette pressed, her voice thin, before Perpetua's floor came to me. Do you know her name? No, Verity said quietly. I don't. And that child should terrify you more than anything I have said tonight, because I am the keeper of every name in Ashmere, and I cannot find hers. Neither can he. Neither can anyone. She closed the ledger with a soft, final sound. You are not the first they have sent up that stair to shelter him. You are only the first who has lasted more than a week. The others held him for a little while, and then the gray noticed the shelter, and it does not forgive a shelter. It took them the way it is taking him, quietly, completely, until even the memory of the memory was gone, and the palace forgot it had ever grieved. She rose, small and terrible in the lamplight. So yes, go up the stair, keep him breathing through the dark. But know what you are walking into, Lynette, because the very thing that makes you able to save him is a thing you will not be able to keep. The moment you begin to hold him, the moment you let yourself want to stay, you give the tide its handle. And then it will do to you what it did to all the girls, whose names I can no longer read. Bastien made it an arrangement, because arrangements were how the palace survived things it could not say aloud. A narrow bed appeared in the alcove off the king's chamber, half hidden by a screen. A key came into Lynette's keeping. Her days emptied of the lower floors and filled with sleep she took in snatches, and her nights belonged, from the tolling of the hour until the gray of dawn, to the largest and loneliest man in the world. She was to keep the fire. She was to keep him anchored through the worst of the dark, and she was to tell no one, which was easy, because there was no one to tell. The strangeness of it took getting used to. She, who had spent her life arranging never to be in a room with her betters, now spent every night 10 feet from the most exalted person in the kingdom, listening to him breathe. She learned the sounds of him, the way the great bed creaked when he turned, the low broken noises he made when the dark came for him, the particular silence that meant he was lying awake and pretending, for her sake or his own, that he was not. She learned that he slept in his clothes, boots and all, like a soldier who expected to be called. She learned that the weapons on his walls were not for show. More than one of them was notched. He was not an easy man to spend a night beside. He did not want to be tended. He made that plain in the first week, with the particular rudeness of a proud creature who has been made helpless and hates it. He answered her in grunts. He turned his back. When she asked on the second night whether he'd like the drapes drawn, he said, I would like to be left in peace. And she said, that's the one thing I'm specifically forbidden to do, Your Majesty, but I'll draw the drapes. And she thought she saw the corner of his mouth move before he schooled it flat. So she talked. She could not help it. Silence had teeth in that room, and talking kept them at bay. She told him about the buttery cat Bishop, who had one eye, and the disposition of a small deposed king, and his long war against an understeward who had once tried to have him drowned, and had regretted it every day since. She did not know when, on the fourth night, his breathing evened out, and the fists came loose from the sheet. She only knew that she kept talking, anyway, into the dark, long after he'd gone. Still, because the sound of her own voice seemed to be the rope he held, it should have been enough. For a few nights, she let herself believe it was a job like any other, a wall between her and him as good as any wall she'd ever built. Then, on the ninth night, he asked her name. He did it gruffly, not looking at her, staring at the fire as though the question embarrassed him. "You know a great deal about a cat," he said. "And I do not know what you are called." Lynette's hands went still on the poker. No one asked. That was the plain truth of her life. People used her and passed her, and now and then thanked the air near her, but no one had ever turned toward her in a warm room and wanted the answer. She was so unused to it that for a moment she couldn't find her own name in her mouth. "Linnet," she said finally. "It's a small brown bird. Nothing much." "Linnet," he repeated. And he turned his head and looked at her when he said it, really looked, gray eyes steady in that ruined, tired face. And he said it again, quietly, like a man setting a stone carefully on a wall he meant to keep. "Linnet." She lay down behind her screen that night with something absurd and enormous glowing in her chest, and she was furious at herself for it. And she could not put it out. "He knows my name," said the foolish, glowing thing. "Someone knows my name." She should have remembered what he was. She came up the next night with the glow still banked warm inside her, and she let herself into the chamber, and the king looked up from the fire at the strange servant who had entered his rooms, and his face held nothing at all. "You're new," he said. The exact words, the exact flat, hunted, weather-worn tone he'd used the very first night, as though the ninth night had never happened. As though she had never happened. "Yes, Your Majesty," Linnet heard herself say, from somewhere far away. "The fire had gone out. I've built it up again." She built the fire. Her hands did not shake, which surprised her. She had spent 20 years being forgotten by people who had never bothered to learn her, and she had told herself, brick by brick, that it did not touch her, that a girl who was no one could not be lost because she had never been found. She had never once let herself discover what it would feel like to be learned, truly learned, wanted, set carefully on a wall like a kept stone, and then, in the space of a single turning of the earth, unlearned, unwanted, unwound. It did not feel like the old invisibility. The old invisibility was a cold she'd been born into, a weather she'd never known the absence of. This was a burn, the specific private agony of having been warm exactly once and then set back out in the snow, of knowing now what she'd been missing all along. She understood, kneeling at that hearth, why the wall had been worth building. This was the thing it had been built against. This was the exact wound it had spent 20 years keeping out, and it had gotten in through a single kind question, and now it was inside her and it would not leave. "I will not do this again," she told herself, feeding the fire with hands that stayed miraculously steady. "I will keep him breathing, and I will keep my wall, and I will not let him learn me twice." It was a good plan. It lasted about as long as it took him to speak. He watched her tend the fire, this stranger who had known her name 18 hours ago, and something in her stubborn silence must have reached him, because he frowned and said, less roughly than before, "You needn't look like that. Whatever I did, I don't remember it. That's rather the trouble with me." "You didn't do anything," Linnet said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "You asked my name last night, Your Majesty. That's all. You seem to have set it down somewhere." He went very still. Then, she did not understand it. Not then. He reached to the small table beside the bed and took up a pen and a scrap of paper, and he said, quietly, not looking at her, "Tell me again slowly." "Linnet," she said. And the Alpha King of Ashmere bent his head and wrote it down, pressing hard, like a man trying to carve a word into water. After that, the nights changed, though it took her a while to understand how. He was gentler with her, or rather he was gentle with her freshly, every night. Because every night he was meeting her for the first time, and something in him, some instinct the Grey had not managed to eat, decided each time to be kind to the quiet girl who built his fire. It was a strange, aching thing, to be courted from the very beginning, over and over, to watch a man discover you nightly, and never once carry the discovery into morning. But there were gifts in it too. She got to see the exact moment, most nights, when the wariness cracked and something younger came through. A dry humor, a startling attention. The boy he must have been before the war made him into a blade, and he listened. That never changed, no matter how much the Grey took. She could tell him a thing and lose it by dawn from his memory, but in the hours she had him, he listened like her voice was the only warm thing in a cold country, and for a girl who had spent her life being looked past, being listened to like, that was a drug she had not known existed. Small things began to appear in the room that she had not put there. A second chair, drawn near the fire, angled toward her side, a blanket, thick and good, folded at the foot of her narrow alcove bed, where the thin one had been. She never saw him do any of it, and he never spoke of it, and he could not possibly remember doing it from one night to the next, and that was how she understood, slowly, that some part of him was leaving instructions for itself, kindnesses arranged in advance for a girl he knew he would forget. He was being gentle with her on a delay. He was reaching forward through his own ruin to set down comforts for a stranger. He trusted himself to care about, even after he'd lost the reason why. It undid her a little more, each time she noticed. The night the wall cracked for good, she was 3 chapters deep into the ongoing saga of Bishop the Buttery Cat. The cat had by now foiled 2 burglars and humiliated an actual visiting bishop, when she reached the part where Bishop, cornered at last by the vengeful understeward, had knocked a full round of the household's best cheese off the high shelf directly onto the man's head, and then sat upon the ruins to eat his fill while the steward wept. Emmerich Vale laughed. It came out of him rough and rusty, a sound like a door that had not been opened in a year, and it clearly startled him as much as it startled her. His hand actually came up, as though to catch it and put it back. But it was too late. He'd laughed low and helpless and real, and his whole ruined face had rearranged itself into something so unexpectedly young and warm that Lynette felt her own mouth pull into a grin. She caught herself covering it with her hand the way she always did, hiding the front tooth that sat a little crooked, the small ugliness she'd been ashamed of, since a golden-haired child had pointed at it in the almshouse yard. "Don't," the king said. She blinked. That, he nodded at her hand, over her mouth. His voice had gone quiet and rough in a different way. "You cover it when you laugh. Don't. It's—" He stopped, looked briefly appalled at himself, and finished, gruffly staring at the fire. "It's the only thing in this room that isn't sad. Let it be seen." Lynette lowered her hand. Her heart was doing something complicated and dangerous. Somewhere at the bottom of the tower, she thought, a lore-keeper had warned her about precisely this, about the moment she began to hold him, about the handle it would give the tide, and she knew, sitting there in the firelight, with her ugly, wonderful tooth on show and a king smiling at it. Later, when he had finally gone, still, and the fire had burned low, she rose to bank it for the night, and her sleeve caught the small book on his bedside table. The one she'd assumed for weeks was a book of reports, the one he consulted, she'd thought, for matters of state, and it fell open on the floor at her feet. It was not a book of reports. She crouched and picked it up, and by the low red light she read, and the whole world went quiet around her. "Her name is Lynette," the first page said, in his hard slanted hand. "She hums when she is frightened. She has ink on her first 2 fingers. Keep this." The next page, Linnet, the night warden. She tells a story about a cat. She covers her mouth when she laughs. And she should not. And the next. Page after page after page. Every entry the same handful of desperate facts written fresh, some in a steady hand and some scrawled as if against a rising panic. A man each midnight trying to build a wall to hold one small brown bird against a tide that ate walls for a living. Keep this, keep this, keep this. And here was the thing that stopped her breath and put her hand over her mouth, crooked tooth and all. The older pages had begun to go blank. Not torn, not smudged. Blank. The ink simply fading up off the paper, whole entries thinning into nothing. The earliest ones already gone to clean pale gaps, exactly like the missing line in a ledger she would not see for 3 more months. The gray was not only eating his memory of her, it had found the book. It was eating the record too. He was fighting for her every single night, in secret, with the only weapon he had. And every single night, quietly, completely, he was losing. She knelt there on the cold floor, with the little book open in her lap, and the dead entries thinning to nothing in her hands. And she thought of Verity's warning, and of the girls whose names even the keeper of all names could no longer read, and she understood at last that she had walked into the exact trap she'd been told to fear. Because she could not put the book down and walk away. Not now. Not knowing, he spent every midnight of his life carving her name into water so it would not be lost by dawn. No one had ever fought to keep her. No one had ever thought her worth a single word, let alone a book of them written in desperation against the dark. And now that someone had, the wall she'd spent her whole life building was, simply, quietly gone, and she could not even remember deciding to let it fall. You give the tide its handle, Verity had said, the moment you let yourself want to stay. Linnet closed the book and pressed it to her chest, and for the first time since a cold week in a hard winter, let herself want to stay. Somewhere far beneath the palace, though she could not have known it, something old and patient turned in its sleep and noticed her. She did not tell him about the book. There was no point. By dawn he would not have known what she meant. But she carried the knowing with her now everywhere, a warm stone and a cold one held together in the same hand, and it changed the way she sat with him in the dark. She stopped hiding behind the screen. It happened by degrees, the way the important things do. One night, she dragged her chair closer, because the fire had died to embers, and the room was cold, and he was shivering in his sleep. The next, when the dark came for him and his breath went ragged, she did not reach across the distance to touch his hand. She simply sat on the edge of the great bed and took it in both of hers, and held on, and talked him down through it. He quieted faster that way. She told herself that was the only reason. There was a night. She would keep it, later, as one of the few things worth keeping, when he surfaced, from the dark not into panic, but into a rare, quiet lucidity, the eye of the storm, and lay looking at the fire with her hand still in his. Tell me something true, he said, low, not the cat. Something true about you. I'll only lose it by morning, so you can say the thing you'd never say to a person who'd remember it. And because it was true, because he wouldn't remember, and that made him the safest confessor in the world, she told him. I've never once been chosen, she said to the fire. Not by anyone. I've been used, and I've been useful, and I've been overlooked. But no one has ever looked at a room full of people and picked me. I stopped wanting them to. A long time ago. It was easier. His thumb moved slowly over her knuckles, once. He was silent so long. She thought he'd drifted off. Then he said, without opening his eyes, if I could keep one thing past a midnight in this whole cursed life, I'd keep that. You told me that. And he fell asleep, holding her hand, and by dawn it was gone from him, and she carried it for both of them. She was lying, and some honest part of her knew it. The truth was that she had spent her whole life at arm's length from every warm thing, and now there was a warm thing that forgot to be frightening every night, that held her hand in the dark like she was a rope he'd been thrown, and she was starving in a way she had not let herself feel since she was a child on a cold step. She wanted to be near him, not for the anchoring, for herself. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever wanted, and she wanted it anyway. The alcove bed went unused after a while. She did not decide it exactly. It simply happened, the way the tide comes in. One night she fell asleep, sitting up with her hand in his, and woke at dawn still there, and the next she lay down atop the covers, so her arm would not cramp, and the one after that she was under them at the very edge, as far from him as the great bed allowed. Telling herself the distance was the point. By the end of that week, the distance was a polite fiction. She woke each dawn to find they had drifted together in the dark like two boats slipped from their moorings, and she would ease herself free before he surfaced, and slip behind the screen, and pretend, for both their sakes, that she had spent the night respectably alone. And something answered the wanting. Deep in her chest, in a place that had been silent her entire life, something stirred. She had wondered, as a foundling, whether she carried a wolf at all. Some did, some didn't, and no one had been there to tell her which she was. Hers had never once woken. She had thought it dead, or absent, or simply another thing she'd been born without. But now, curled beside a sleeping king, with his hand in hers, she felt it lift its head for the first time in 20 years and turn slowly toward him, as though it had been waiting its whole life to be given a reason to wake. That was the good change. The other change came in small ways first, so small she almost let herself not notice them, a name that would not come when she reached for it, the undercook she'd known for 6 years. The color of the almshouse door, little smooth places appearing in her here and there, like moth holes in a coat you've worn your whole life. She told herself she was tired. She told herself everyone forgets small things. Then came the morning. She forgot the song. It was a small song, a nothing song. The almshouse woman, the one who had written Linnet in the ledger, the closest thing to a mother she'd ever had, used to hum it while she worked, tuneless and low, and it was the one warm thing Linnet had carried out of that cold place. The melody she hummed to herself when she was frightened, the melody she'd hummed over Emmerich on the very first night. She had had it her whole life. It was, if she was honest, the only inheritance she'd ever been given. She woke that morning and reached for it, the way you reach, without thinking, for a thing you've always had. And it was not there. She could remember that there had been a psalm. She could remember humming it. She could remember the shape of the woman's mouth making it, and the smell of lye and baking bread that went with it, and the exact warmth of being small and frightened and hummed at anyway. But the tune itself was gone, lifted clean out of her, leaving a smooth pale silence, where 20 years of comfort used to live. She tried, for an hour, to find it. She tried until she wept. It did not come, and it was never going to come, and some cold, certain part of her understood that Linnet sat up in the gray dawn, with her heart pounding, and understood, with total clarity, what it meant. Verity had told her plainly. The moment he began to hold him, you give the tide its handle. She had let herself want to stay. She had given her wall away for a book full of her own name. And now the gray, which had slid off her for weeks because there was nothing in her to grip, had finally found a handle. It had noticed the shelter, and it had begun, very quietly, to eat her too. She should have been afraid. She was afraid, but underneath the fear was something she had not expected and could not shake, a fierce, stubborn gladness. The gray could take her song, could take her memories one by one, could unwrite her from the world, the way it had unwritten the girls before her. And it would only be taking things from a girl who had never had much worth keeping. Whereas every night she stayed, the king breathed. That felt, to Linnet, like the first fair trade the world had ever offered her. She did not know that he had noticed her too, not the way she meant it. Something older than his broken memory had noticed. It came out on a bad night, one of the worst, when the dark had him so deep that holding his hand was not enough, and she had climbed onto the bed and simply wrapped herself around him, her cheek to his back, her arms around his ribs, anchoring him with the whole weight of her small body while he shook. When it passed and he surfaced, he did not pull away. He turned in her arms in the dark and pressed his face into her hair and breathed her in, long and deep and desperate, the way a man breathes who has just remembered the air. "You," he said against her, and his voice was wrecked. "It's you. My wolf knows you. It has known you for weeks, and I did not. I could not hold it long enough to understand." His arms came around her, careful and shaking, like she was something that might break or might vanish. "You're mine, mate. The bond's been forming since the first night you knelt at my hearth and hummed at me like I was a frightened horse. A broken sound that was almost a laugh. That's why you can shelter me, two halves of one thing. Of course, the tide can't find you through me. You were never separate enough to catch." Lynette lay very still in his arms with the word mate ringing through her like a struck bell. She, who had been chosen by no one. She whose whole self was built around the certainty that she was no one's to want. A mate was the opposite of a foundling. A mate was a person the universe itself had picked out and set aside and said, this one belongs to this one." And something in her 20 years walled chest cracked straight down the middle to hear it. "Say it again," she whispered before she could stop herself. "Mate," he said, and pressed the word into her hair like a kiss. "Mine. If I have to relearn it every midnight of my life, I will relearn it gladly. I will fill 100 books with it." Then he went rigid and pulled back, and she watched the joy in his ruined face curdle into horror as he understood what she already knew. "No," he said. "No. Do you know what a mate bond is? It ties us, root and marrow. What happens to me, happens to you." His eyes searched her face and found the answer there, found the smooth, pale place where her song used to be, because a mate can feel the shape of a mate's loss. "It's already taking you, isn't it? You've already lost something." He said it like a man reading his own death warrant. "I felt it. Days ago. I felt something go out of you, and I told myself, I imagined it. Emeric. I will not do it." He was off the bed now, on his feet, all the old dangerous certainty flooding back into him. And it was terrible to watch because it was aimed entirely at himself. "I have forgotten a family's name. I forget my own counsel every morning of my life, and I am going to keep forgetting, faster and faster until there is nothing left of me, and I will not drag you down into that dark. I will not let the last thing I do in this world be to erase the only person who was ever fool enough to hold me." "That's not your choice," Lynette said, rising. "The bond's already. It's the only choice I have left." He would not look at her. "You're relieved of your post. Tonight, Bastien will see you settled somewhere far from here. Somewhere the pull is weak, and in a month you won't even remember my name. And that," his voice cracked clean in half, "that will be the first mercy this curse has ever done anyone. Go. Please. Before I'm not strong enough to send you." So she went, because he was a king and she was a servant, and 20 years of being. No one does not unlearn itself in a night, and because his face when he said please was a thing she could not argue with. She got as far as the bottom of the royal stair. That was where she was standing, when it happened, when the pull of him snapped taut and then horribly began to fray, the way a rope frays when you cut the strand that held it. Behind her, above her, she heard it, a long, low groan of stone and timber, and a wrongness rolling out through the palace like a cold wave. She turned. The entire east wing of the royal floor was graying out, not falling, fading. Doorways smoothing over into blank wall. A whole gallery of Ashmere's kings, finning to fog in their frames. The palace forgetting itself in great swaths. All at once, the moment she stepped out of range of him, because she had been holding back the tide for weeks, with her body and her stubborn nothing heart, and she had just been sent away. and without her the grey had surged in like the sea through a broken dike. A servant ran past her on the stair, white-faced, and did not see her, because there was suddenly less of the world to see her with. A guard stood frozen at the landing, staring at a wall, where a door had been a moment before, his hand still raised to a handle that no longer existed. Somewhere above, she heard Bastien shouting for the king in a voice with real fear in it. The fear of a man watching a year's slow bleed become, in the space of a held breath, a hemorrhage. He could not survive her leaving. She had proof of it now, written in vanishing stone. Every year of decline he'd suffered had been slowed. She realized, held at bay, dammed up by a nameless girl who was never even supposed to matter. Take her away, and the whole flood came at once. Lynette turned around and started back up the stair. Bastien tried to stop her on the landing. She looked at him, small, ink-fingered wolf, finally awake and blazing behind her eyes, and said, "The east wing is gone. Did you feel it? It went the instant I left him. You know what that means, as well as I do." Her voice did not shake. "He sent me away to save me. It's going to kill him. I'm not going to let it." Bastien, who had spent a year watching his king die by inches and hiding it from the world, looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "He'll rage," the second warned quietly. "Let him." Emeric was standing at the window when she came in, and he went white when he saw her. "I told you. You told me a lot of things," Lynette said, shutting the door behind her. "But you already have, Emeric. The bond did that the first night, and there's no undoing it now. And sending me away doesn't save me. It just means we both drown separately instead of holding on to each other while we do it." She crossed the room to him. He backed up until the window stopped him. This enormous, dangerous man retreating from a girl half his size, because the one thing in the world he was afraid of was hurting her. "The east wing went dark the second I hit the bottom of the stair. You felt it. You know staying away from you doesn't make me safe. It just makes you alone." Lynette, her name came out of him like a prayer and a curse together. "If you stay, it takes you. I have felt what it does. I would not wish it on my worst." "Then let it take me slowly holding your hand," she said, "instead of quickly, out there in the cold, forgetting you a stranger. I've spent my whole life being no one so that no one could leave me. I'm done. I would rather be someone who loses everything than nobody who never had a thing to lose." Her eyes filled, but did not spill. "You wrote my name in a book every night, so you wouldn't lose it. Do you have any idea what that did to me? No one ever fought to keep me before. Not once. You don't get to be the first person who ever wanted me, and then send me away for my own good. That's not how being wanted works." "I checked. I am trying," he said, and his voice broke on it, "to do one decent thing before I forget how. Let me, please. Everyone I have ever loved I have lost or spent. Let there be one I didn't ruin. You won't ruin me." She was close now, close enough to feel the heat of him, close enough that the newly woken thing in her chest strained toward the newly woken thing in his. "The war didn't ruin you. Losing him didn't ruin you. The only thing that could ruin you now is deciding you're not worth staying for, and I know that decision. Emeric, I made it about myself when I was 11 years old, and I have paid for it every day since. Don't make it. Not about you. Not about us." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Stop trying to spare me the grief of loving you. It's mine. I want it. It's the first thing I've ever chosen." For a long moment he simply looked at her, all his walls and all his kingly certainty useless against a truth that plain. Then he reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step back, and cupped her face in one enormous scarred hand, and Lynette turned her cheek into his palm, and did not step back at all. What passed between them that night was not the coupling of a king and a servant. It was two halves of one broken thing, finding each other in the dark, and deciding, at last, to stop being alone. When the bond sealed, when his wolf and her newly waking one, reached across the last of the distance, and caught. It settled into her chest, like a lit hearth in a house that had stood cold. Her whole life, golden and aching and unbearably right. She felt him on the other end of it, all of him, the grief, and the exhaustion, and the vast helpless tenderness he'd never once had a safe place to put. She held it. She held him. And for the first time in a year, King Emmerich Vale fell asleep in someone's arms, and did not flinch from the falling. Afterward, in the dark, he traced the line of her cheek like a man learning a map he intended to keep. "I'll forget this by morning," he murmured. "Not sad now, only quiet. I'll wake, and you'll be a stranger, and I'll have to fall for you all over again from the beginning. Then I'll be here, for the beginning," she said, "every morning. As many beginnings as it takes. That's a great deal of falling to ask of a man." "You're an alpha king," she said. "You can take it." And she felt him smile against her hair, and felt it travel down the bond and warm her from the inside, and she thought, with a fierceness that frightened her, that she would burn down the whole gray world before she let anything take this from her. She followed him down into sleep, with the bond humming, warm between them, and her wolf curled, contented against his. And that was how the gray finally got her all the way inside. She opened her eyes to fog. Not the edge of it, the way she'd half glimpsed it before, through the thin place in his dreams, but the deep heart of it, the true country of the curse, cold and gray and endless, the air thick with ash and the smell of things forgotten. She was standing in it, whole and real, pulled all the way through by the sealed bond that now tied her to him past flesh, past waking, down to whatever it was in a person that a curse could not reach. And ahead of her, through the drifting gray, she saw him, and beyond him, rising out of the fog, where no building had any business being, stood a door, a single door, dark wood-banded in iron, standing alone in the emptiness. Carved deep into its face was a single word, a name, and the sight of it stopped Lynette's heart in her chest, because she understood at once that whatever was behind that door was the thing at the very center of everything. The first memory he'd surrendered, the wound that had called the tide. The name carved into the door was Soren. "Don't," Emmerich said. He was standing before the door with his back to her, and his voice in this place was young and stripped of all its armor. "Don't come any closer. You shouldn't see this. I shouldn't see this. It's the one I gave away." "Who is Soren?" Lynette asked softly, though the bond was already answering her, already pushing the grief through into her own chest, so that her eyes stung with tears that were not hers. "My brother. He said it the way you'd confess a murder. Younger. Reckless." He had a laugh you could hear across a battlefield, which is a terrible thing for a soldier to have, and he never once cared. His hand rose toward the carved name, and stopped short of touching it. "I told him to stay home. I ordered it. He was 17, and he forged a commission and rode north after me anyway, because he could not stand to let me go into the worst of it alone." A long, shaking breath. "He always did think I needed looking after. Our mother died when he was small, and I half raised him, and he never learned the difference between me being his king and me being the boy who used to carry him on my shoulders. To him, I was only ever Emmerich. He was the one person in the world who didn't flinch when I walked into a room, his voice thinned to nothing. I have not been able to remember his face for a year. Do you understand what that is? To grieve someone whose face the grief itself has stolen? To wake every morning missing a person you cannot even picture?" Lynette reached for his hand. He let her take it. "Show me," she said gently. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore. That's what the bond's for. Show me who you lost." The door swung open on its own. Beyond it was not a room. It was the northern pass on the last day of the Ashval War, rebuilt out of fog and memory, and Lynette stood at the edge of it and watched it happen the way Emmerich had watched it happen every night for a year, without being able to remember why he woke screaming. She saw the line breaking. She saw Grail's forces driving a wedge, and beyond them, the granaries, where 10,000 souls were penned and waiting to burn. She saw young Soren cut off on the wrong side of the wedge, fighting to get back, calling his brother's name, Emeric. Emeric, his voice carrying across the whole terrible field the way it always carried. And she saw Emeric, at the head of the line, forced in a single unbearable heartbeat to choose, break formation and cross the field to reach his brother, and lose the line, and let 10,000 burn or hold, and win, and let the field take Soren. She lived it through the bond, which meant she did not merely watch it, she felt it, felt the exact moments stretch out long and slow the way the worst moments do, felt him standing at the head of the line with his brother's voice in his ears, and the weight of 10,000 strangers on his shoulders, and no version of the next second that did not cost him everything. There was no right choice. That was the horror of it. There was only a wound, shaped like a boy, and a wound shaped like a city, and a man who had to pick which one to carry for the rest of his life. She saw him hold. She felt it go through him even now, a year and a curse later. The exact shape of that heartbeat, the moment he did not turn, did not break, did not go to his brother, because a king does not spend 10,000 lives to save one, even when the one is the only person alive who ever thought he needed looking after. She felt Soren's voice stop. She felt the war end. An hour later, one. She felt Emeric walk out across the quiet field afterward, and find his brother where he had fallen, and carry him home through his own cheering army, with his face perfectly still, and give the orders for the victory, and accept the surrender of Grail's banner, and never once make a sound. She felt him hold it together through the triumph and the homecoming and the crowds throwing flowers. All of it, the whole hollow parade of having won, and then she felt him kneel, alone in his chambers on the first quiet night, and finally break. And she felt the wish. The one the Grey had heard. Kneeling in the dark with the memory of his brother's stopped voice, Emeric Vale had wished with the whole ruined force of his soul that he could simply not remember this, that some mercy would reach into him and take this one thing away, because he could bear anything, had borne anything, would go on bearing anything. Not the sound of Soren calling him and him not turning. Something in the fog had been listening, and it had said, yes. And it had been taking, ever since, taking Soren first, and then, when Soren was not enough to fill it, taking everything else, one thread a night, because grief is a door, and once it is opened, the tide does not stop at a single room. Now the fog gathered and thickened and spoke, and its voice was Soren's, because the cruelest thing the Grey owned was the voices of the people you'd lost. You could have come for me, it said gently, in her mate's dead brother's warm carrying voice. You chose them over me. You have always known you were the kind of man who would. A pause, soft as falling ash. But I can take it away, Emeric. All of it. Him, the pass, the choice, the whole year of waking. Just give me the last of it. Give me your brother, and your servant, and your own name, and I will give you peace. You are so tired. You have been tired for a year. Let me unwrite it all. A mind with nothing left inside it does not grieve. It does not lie awake, hearing a boy call a name. It refused to answer. And Lynette watched in dawning horror as her mate, exhausted past the end of himself, believing to the bottom of his soul that he deserved to lose everything. That a man who would not turn for his brother did not get to keep anything he loved, lifted his hand toward the fog to give it the last thing he had. She felt it through the bond, all of it, the terrible seductive relief of it, how good it would feel to simply set the whole weight down and not have to carry the memory for even one more night. She understood, in that instant, why every remedy had failed, why the chains had failed, why nothing anyone tried had ever held. Because some hidden, exhausted part of him had wanted this, had been reaching for it in his sleep for a year. You cannot save a man from a thing he is holding the door open for. Emeric, no. His fingers reached for the offered dark. Stop. Lynette threw herself between him and the fog, both hands flat against his chest, and the shock of the bond flaring at the contact was the only thing that seemed to reach him. His hand faltered. Listen to me, Listen, it's lying to you. It's been lying to you for a year. It's mercy, he said dully, his eyes fixed past her on the gray. I'm so tired, Lynette. I just want to put it down. I know. Her voice broke on it. Because she did know. Gods. She knew what it was to be so tired of hurting that forgetting looked like kindness. I know that tiredness. Let me tell you something I've never told anyone. She took his ruined face in both her ink-stained hands and made him look at her. Only at her. They left me on a step. My whole life I believed I deserved it. That if I'd been a better baby, a quieter one, a prettier one, they'd have kept me. I built my whole self around being no one, because if I was no one, then losing me couldn't have cost anyone anything, and their leaving didn't have to mean I hadn't been worth staying for. The tears came now, and she let them. That's what the gray does. It takes the worst thing you believe about yourself, and it gives it a voice you love, and it says the thing you're already saying in the dark. That's not Soren. Soren never once thought you should have let him die alone. That's you, Emeric. That's your own guilt, wearing your brother's laugh. The fog voice faltered. Forgetting isn't mercy, she said fiercely. I know because I tried it for 20 years. If you let it take Soren, you don't stop the pain. You lose him twice. First, the war took him. And now you'd let this thing take the ache of missing him. And the ache of missing him is the last of him you've got left. That ache is just love, Emeric. It's love with nowhere left to go. You're allowed to keep it. You're allowed to keep him. She pressed her forehead to his. You did the right and terrible thing on that field. 10,000 people went home to their children because you held that line. And it cost you the one you loved most, and that cost is real, and you get to grieve it for the rest of your life. But grieving it is not the same as deserving to be erased. You are allowed to hurt. You are not required to disappear. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then Emeric Vale began, at last, to weep. A year of it, a war of it, breaking out of him all at once. And he pulled his hand back from the fog and turned instead to the door where his brother's name was carved, and he laid his palm flat against it, and he said, in a voice full of ruin and love, I'm sorry, Soren. I'm sorry I didn't come. I would give my life to have come, but I'm not going to forget you, not to make it stop hurting. You're worth the hurt. You always were. And the fog around the door thinned, and something vast and grieving, and finally at rest, seemed to sigh out through the gray and let go. But the gray did not let go of everything. Denied the great bargain, it turned, the way a starving thing turns, toward the one handle it still had, toward the girl who had walked into its heart with a lit hearth in her chest and a wolf, newly woken and everything, suddenly, to lose. Lynette felt it seize her, felt the cold rushing in where the warmth had been. And she understood, in the space of a breath, exactly what was being offered, and exactly what it would cost, because the gray needed a price for being cheated of him, and she was standing right there, holding a bond that would let it take her clean. She did not hesitate. That surprised her. Later, a whole life spent flinching. And when it mattered, she did not flinch at all. Take me instead, she said to the fog. Him you can't have. He chose to keep his grief. You've got no handle on a man who'll hold his own pain. But me, I'm easy. I've been no one my whole life. No one will even miss me. She was already fading, already going gray at the edges. And she turned to Emeric with the last of herself and gave him the only gift she had. Let me be the thread it pulls. Let it forget me all the way, and take back everything else it stole. The river, the wing, your counsel, your brother, your name. That's a fair trade. That's the first fair trade I've ever. But she was already gone. She disappeared out of the gray, and out of the world, and out of every mind that had ever held her, the way she'd asked to, completely, mercifully, so that the man she loved would be free and whole, and would not even have to carry the grief of losing her. The tide closed over the place where she'd been, and Emmerich Vale woke alone in his chambers, with his memory flooding back all at once. The river, the wing, his brother, his own name, a whole year returning in a roaring tide, and one single unbearable blank pale gap in the middle of it, where someone had just been. Everything played out as it began, a king tearing his kingdom apart for a girl he could not name, a ledger with a missing line, the world graying softly around her absence. And then, on his knees, in the wreckage of the throne room, King Emmerich Vale did the one thing the Grey had never counted on. He did not let them soothe him. He drove his mind into the blank place, like a blade into a wound, and held on to the wrongness, the fragments, the not knowing with all the ferocious will of an alpha who had broken armies. And he followed the one thread the Grey could never cut, the mate bond humming faint and golden at the very bottom of his chest, back down into the fog. He walked into the Grey after her, the way she had walked into it after him. He found her at the edge of dissolving, a girl going quietly to nothing, and he took her face in his hands, and he did the thing he had failed to do for the whole length of their story. He learned her name, not the placeholder an almshouse had scrawled in a ledger for lack of anything better, but her, chosen, wanted, held on purpose against the whole weight of the tide. He said it like it was the truest word in any language. He said it like it had always, from the beginning of the world, been meant for exactly her, Lynette. And this time, because it was spoken by a man who had learned to hold what he loved without wishing the pain away, a man the tide could get no grip on at all. The Grey could not take it back. The name held, she held, the fog let go. He carried her up out of the dark, and the world remembered her all at once. The missing line filling back in on the ledger in fresh dark ink, the greyed wing standing whole again. A girl no one had been able to name suddenly and permanently unforgettable. And King Emmerich Vale walked out of a year of erasure into the grey light of dawn with his mate alive, in his arms, and his brother safe in his memory. And at last, his own whole mind, his own again. The curse did not leave all at once, and it did not leave nothing behind. Emmerich still grieved. That was the point. In the end he was allowed to now. There were nights he woke with Soren's laugh ringing in his ears, and lay in the dark, and let it hurt. And Lynette lay beside him, and let it hurt too, her hand over his heart, neither of them pretending the ache was anything other than love with its person gone. He kept a chair for his brother at the head of the council table, empty, and no one ever asked him to explain it, and he never did. But he slept. Gods, he slept, whole nights of it. Deep and dreamless, his mate's small, warm weight, tucked against his chest, and his wolf, curled content around hers. He remembered his counsel in the mornings. He remembered the river, which they unburied from the old maps and let run again. He remembered every single day the day before, the way ordinary people do, and never once think to be grateful for. And every morning, before he opened his eyes, before he washed or dressed or spoke to a single soul, he did the same thing. He reached across the bed until his hand found her, and he said her name into the quiet, not because he was afraid of losing it anymore, but because he had spent a year unable to keep it, and he had decided he would never again let a morning come that did not begin with him choosing to remember her on purpose. He'd murmur into her hair, "Still here," she'd say every time, "Still yours." The court took a while to accept a foundling lamp girl as their queen, of course. The whispers followed her through the halls for a season, the sidelong looks, the endless careful question of who is she, really? Where does she come from? What is her line? Lord Thane and half the council made their disapproval into an art. But Emmerich had a way of ending the conversation. He would take her hand in front of all of them and say, mild as milk, that anyone who objected to his queen was welcome to raise it with the king, who happened to be extremely unreasonably permanently in love with her, and who forgot a great many things, but had made quite sure he would never again forget that. The objections grew quiet after a while. Verity, who had spent a lifetime keeping the names of the dead, said it was the first time in her memory the archive had gained a name instead of losing one, and she wrote Linnet, Queen of Ashmere, into the great ledger herself, in ink that never once faded. Linnet found she did not mind the whispers the way she'd once have minded. Let them wonder where she came from. She knew where she was going. She had spent 20 years as no one, so that no one could ever leave her. And it had taken a cursed king and a country made of fog to teach her the thing she'd had backward her whole life. That being someone was worth the risk of being lost, and that the people worth having were the ones who would walk into the dark and learn your name and carry you back out of it again and as many times as the tide required. She was small and brown and common as her name, a bird no one had ever looked at twice. He looked at her every day for the rest of his life,